Get your hands off that car right now." The woman's voice cut across the showroom like a blade dragged over glass. Marcus Bell straightened slowly, a wrench resting in his open palm, grease worked into the creases of his knuckles. He had been crouched beside the open hood of a stalled luxury sedan for 11 minutes. And in those 11 minutes, he had found the problem nobody else in the building could. "I was only trying to help," he said. "Help?" She laughed, and it was not a kind sound. "Look at you. You smell like a garage. You walk in here in those filthy boots. You put your dirty hands all over a $200,000 automobile. And you think you are helping? Security. Get this man off my floor before he ruins something he could never afford to replace." Marcus did not raise his voice. He set the wrench gently on the rolling cart beside him and looked at her with the calm that comes only to people who have already survived the worst thing that will ever happen to them. He would let her speak to him that way 2 more times before the morning was over. The third time would cost her the company her grandfather built, the reputation she had spent her whole life polishing, and very nearly everything she owned. She did not know that yet. She could not have known that the man she was calling filthy had signed the papers that made him the owner of the ground beneath her 3 weeks earlier. So what was it about that morning that nearly destroyed a man who had only stopped to help? Let me take you back. The path to that showroom began long before the lights ever came on. Marcus Bell grew up in a narrow brick row house on the east side of Cleveland, where the furnace only worked when it felt like it, and the winters did not negotiate. His father ran a small engine repair shop 2 blocks from the lake. His mother took in sewing for the families on the hill, the ones who never learned her name. Neither of his parents finished high school. Neither of them ever once complained where their son could hear it. What they handed down to him was not money. It was a kind of patient attention, the habit of looking closely at a broken thing until it told you the truth about itself. By the time he was 9, Marcus could rebuild a carburetor on the kitchen table. By 16, he understood engines the way some people understand music. By feel, by sound, by the small wrongness in a rhythm nobody else could hear. He could not afford college. So he worked his father's shop through 2 brutal winters and took night classes in mechanical engineering until a professor told him he was wasting himself fixing tailpipes. He was not wasting himself. He was learning. At 27, Marcus designed a small diagnostic device, a sensor array that could read the health of an engine the way a doctor reads a heartbeat, catching failures weeks before they happen. He built the first one in his father's shop with $400 and a soldering iron that had belonged to his grandfather. The first year, no one bought it. The third year, every fleet manager in the Midwest wanted his name on a contract. By 40, Marcus Bell was the founder and majority owner of Halstead Bell Holdings, a private group that owned manufacturing plants, a logistics network, and a controlling stake in 3 automotive brands across 9 states. A business magazine had put him on its cover once. He had turned down every interview request since. He believed, the way his father had believed, that real power did not need to announce itself in a loud room. 3 weeks before that morning, Halstead Bell Holdings had quietly completed the purchase of the Sterling Whitfield Automotive Group, a chain of high-end dealerships with a famous name, a famous clientele, and quietly collapsing numbers. The deal was worth $184 million. Marcus had studied the company for half a year before he made an offer. He knew its sales figures, its service records, its employee turnover. He also knew its chief executive, Diane Sterling Whitfield, 41 years old, the granddaughter of the man who founded it. Old name, old money, old habits she had never once questioned. Under her leadership, 2 senior managers, both black, had quietly left within a single year. One had filed a formal complaint describing a hostile environment. It had been reviewed, marked resolved, and buried in a drawer without a single interview being conducted. Diane's explanation both times had been the same 4 words. They were not a fit. Marcus had read that complaint twice. He remembered every line. When the acquisition closed, his board asked how he wanted to announce his ownership to the staff. He told them he would do it himself, in person, at the company's anniversary showcase that Friday. He did not tell them he intended to arrive early, in his work clothes, and simply watch. He wanted to see the company as it truly was when it did not know the owner was in the room. The flagship showroom of Sterling Whitfield sat on a wide boulevard on the north side of Columbus, like a temple built to admire itself. Floor-to-ceiling glass, Italian tile polished to a mirror, a row of automobiles arranged under warm light like sculptures in a museum nobody was allowed to touch. That Friday morning, the staff moved through the space in tailored suits, arranging flutes of champagne on silver trays for the afternoon. The air smelled of leather, fresh lilies, and money that had never once worried about itself. Diane Sterling Whitfield arrived at 9:40 in a charcoal dress that probably cost more than most of her employees made in a month. She moved through the showroom the way a person moves through a place they have never had to ask permission to enter. She touched a shoulder here, corrected a flower arrangement there, remembered the first names of the clients who mattered, and looked straight through the staff who did not. She was the host. She was the heir. She owned this room the way her family had always owned rooms. At 9:51, the trouble started, and it had nothing to do with Marcus. The centerpiece of the showcase, a flagship sedan worth just over $200,000, would not start. It had been driven onto the floor that morning, parked under the brightest light, and then it had simply gone dead. No dashboard, no ignition, nothing. The dealership's 2 service technicians stood around the open hood like men at a funeral, plugging in their diagnostic tablets, getting back nothing but error codes that made no sense. Marcus had walked in 12 minutes earlier through the service entrance in a faded work jacket, jeans, and boots that had seen a decade of honest labor. No one had asked his name. A young salesman had assumed he was a delivery driver and waved him toward the back. So Marcus stood at the edge of the floor, watching the way he had planned to. And he listened to the 2 technicians for exactly 4 minutes before he understood what they did not. It was not the battery. It was not the starter. It was a fault in the control module, a known defect in that exact model year, a tiny relay that failed in a specific way and mimicked a dozen other problems. He had read the engineering bulletins on it. He knew that if they kept jumping the battery and swapping the starter, they would waste the entire morning and the car would still be dead when the clients arrived. So Marcus did what his father had taught him to do when something was broken and he knew how to fix it. He stepped forward and asked the technicians quietly if he could take a look. One of them, out of ideas, stepped aside. Marcus leaned under the hood, found the relay housing, and was 3 seconds from showing them the failed component when a voice stopped the entire room. "Get your hands off that car right now." And that was the first time. Diane crossed the floor in 9 quick steps, her heels striking the tile like small hammers. She did not ask who he was. She did not ask what he had found. She saw the work jacket, the boots, the grease on his hands, and her mind finished the sentence before he could open his mouth. She told him he smelled like a garage. She told him he had no business touching a car he could never afford. She called for security in a voice loud enough that 3 early clients near the entrance turned to watch. Marcus set the wrench down. "I understand," he said. He did not argue. He let his hands fall to his sides. And as he did, he turned the thin, elastic hair tie he wore looped around his right wrist, half hidden under his cuff. He turned it once, slowly the way another man might take a deep breath. Then he went still. The head of security, A broad-shouldered man named Russell Pratt arrived with a frown already on his face. He looked at Marcus, then at Diane, then back at the dead car. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "he came in through the service door. He has not damaged anything. He looks like maybe he is a mechanic." "I do not care what he looks like," Diane said. "I want him off my floor. We have clients arriving in less than 2 hours, and I will not have him standing here like a stain on the showcase." Russell exhaled through his nose. He did not like the order, but he nodded and he gestured toward the side of the room, away from the cars, away from the light. Marcus allowed himself to be steered. He had spent 30 years reading rooms, and he could feel this one tightening around him. The salespeople pretending not to watch, the clients whispering, the careful geometry of a space rearranging itself to push one man toward the edge. He went to a chair near the service hallway and sat down with the patience of a man who has waited his whole life for rooms to acknowledge him. He did not check his phone. There was a single voice message waiting on it, sent that morning, and he did not open it. He set the phone face down on his knee and watched the 2 technicians return to the dead car and begin once again to do everything wrong. Here is something worth knowing, and it is the kind of thing Marcus had spent his life on. A modern luxury car contains dozens of small computers, and any one of them, when it fails, can throw the whole machine into silence. The art of fixing it is not strength. It is listening. It is refusing to assume the loudest, most expensive answer is the right one. The cheapest part in the entire car had killed it, and the most expensive person in the room could not see that, because she had decided the cheap thing did not matter. Remember that. The whole morning turns on it. At 10:06, a longtime client named Bradford Lane arrived, a developer with a yacht tan and the easy cruelty of a man who has never once been told no. His eyes drifted across the floor and landed on Marcus, sitting alone by the hallway in his work jacket. "Who is that?" he asked Diane, lowering his voice but not nearly enough. "He looks like he wandered in from a loading dock." "Some mechanic," she said. "He put his hands all over the showcase car. I had Russell move him." Bradford laughed. "This is what happens when you stop watching the back door," he said. "Next thing you know, they will be asking to test drive the inventory." Diane smiled the way a cat smiles at something small and trapped, and the dead car sat there under the brightest light in the building, refusing to start. By 10:30, the showroom was filling and the technicians had given up. They were now talking about towing the sedan out of the showcase entirely. An embarrassment that would gut the centerpiece of the whole event. Diane's careful mourning was unraveling, and she did what people like her always do when their world begins to slip. She looked for someone smaller to blame. She walked over to where Marcus sat and she stood over him. "I thought I told Russell to get you out of here," she said. The nearest client turned to listen. "You are still sitting in my showroom, in those boots, touching my furniture with those hands. Did you think someone was going to hire you? Did you think you belonged here?" Marcus looked up at her. His voice, when it came, was low and steady and absolutely calm. "I came here to do a job," he said. "That is all. There is no job for you here," she said. "There never was." She leaned down, and her voice dropped to something quieter and far more vicious than a shout. "Take your tools. Take your jacket. Take whatever fantasy brought you through that door. And get out before I have you dragged out in front of every client in this building." And that was the second time. A young woman a few feet away, a junior member of the sales team, looked at Marcus with something that might have been shame. But she said nothing. She looked at the floor, and pity that does nothing is just an audience with a better conscience. Marcus stood up. He did not gather the tools because they were not his. He buttoned his work jacket against the cold of the room, and he did one thing before he turned to go. He looked for a long moment at the dead car under the lights. Then back at Diane, and he said quietly so only she and the two clients beside her could hear, "It is the control module. The relay. Your people are going to spend all afternoon on the wrong thing." Then he turned toward the service doors. He did not get there, because the front doors opened at that exact moment, and a man in a tailored gray suit walked in carrying a leather folio, scanning the room with the brisk efficiency of someone arriving for a meeting that mattered. His name was Theodore Banks, the chief financial officer of Halstead Bell Holdings, and he had come to brief the senior staff on the ownership transition before the afternoon showcase. He had been told the new chairman would meet him there. Theodore's eyes swept the room, the suits, the champagne, the dead car, and stopped on a man in a faded work jacket walking toward the service hallway. His whole face changed. "Mr. Bell," Theodore said, and his voice carried across the marble floor. "Sir, I am sorry I am late. The traffic on the interstate was impossible." The showroom did not fall silent all at once. It happened in waves, the way a wind moves across a field. The clients nearest the door heard it first, then the salespeople. Then Diane Sterling Whitfield, standing with her hand still half raised toward the service exit, the word out still cooling on her lips. Marcus stopped walking. Theodore crossed the floor quickly, extended his hand, and Marcus took it. The first handshake anyone in that building had offered him all morning. "Theodore," Marcus said, "you are not late. I was early. I wanted to see the place before the program started." Diane's mind was moving very fast and getting nowhere. "Mr. Bell," she said, and her voice had a small crack running through it now. "I am sorry, I do not." "Who?" The question dissolved before she could finish it. Theodore looked at her, then at Marcus, and a flicker of confusion crossed his face. Because he could not understand why his chairman was standing by the service door in a work jacket, while the chief executive looked at him as if she had never seen him before. "Miss Whitfield," he said slowly, "have you not met? This is Marcus Bell. He is the chairman and majority owner of Halstead Bell Holdings. As of 3 weeks ago, he owns the controlling interest in this company. He owns this building. He owns the car you are all standing around." The color left Diane's face the way water leaves a cracked vase. Fast, total, impossible to hide. Her lips parted and no sound came out. Near the entrance, Bradford Lane's easy grin slid off his face and shattered somewhere on the polished tile. The young saleswoman who had looked at the floor now looked up, her hand pressed to her mouth. Russell Pratt, standing near the column, slowly straightened his posture, and the corner of his mouth moved in something that was almost, but not quite, a smile. Marcus walked back across the floor. Every eye followed him. He did not go to Diane's. He went to the dead car. He reached under the hood, into the housing the technicians had never opened, and with 2 fingers he pulled out a small black relay no bigger than a sugar cube. He held it up so the nearest people could see it. "This," he said to the 2 technicians, "is what killed it. Known defect in this model year. It fails in a way that looks like 10 other problems, so people chase the expensive answers and never check the cheap one." He set the relay in the nearest technician's palm. "Replacement is in the parts bay, second shelf. You will have it running in 15 minutes. Then he closed the hood and turned to face Diane Sterling Whitfield, and the entire showroom held its breath. He did not mention the word filthy. He did not repeat what she had called him. He did not quote her back to herself. He did not need to. Every person in that room had heard it, and every person was already replaying the morning in their mind, counting how loudly they had laughed, how quickly they had agreed, how visible their own silence had been. "Miss Whitfield," Marcus said. His voice had not changed since he first picked up the wrench. Calm, level, the kind of calm that leaves no room to bargain. "An hour ago you told me I smelled like a garage. You told me I could never afford to replace what I was touching. You told me I did not belong here." He paused. I want to ask you one question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer it. If I had been exactly the man you believed I was, just a mechanic in old boots, would any of that have been acceptable? Diane opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Because that is the part that matters, Marcus said. Not who I turned out to be. Who you were when you thought no one who counted was watching. Mr. Bell, please, she said, and the words came tumbling now, fast and desperate. I had no idea. If I had known who you were, I would never have. Please, you have to understand, this is a misunderstanding. If you had known who I was, Marcus repeated, and he let the sentence hang in the air. That is the whole problem, Miss Whitfield. You are not sorry for what you did. You are sorry for who you did it to. He took out his phone and dialed a number, and it connected on the second ring. Patricia, he said. It is Marcus. I need the legal and human resources teams on a call within the hour. We are opening a full internal review of the Sterling Whitfield Group. Executive conduct, every personnel complaint. From the last 3 years, the 2 managers who left, all of it. He paused. Yes, starting today. He ended the call and looked at Diane. Effective immediately, you are suspended from your position as chief executive, pending the outcome of that review. You will not enter any company office. You will not contact any employee. You will not issue any statement on behalf of this company. He glanced toward the service hallway. Russell, the head of security, stepped forward. He had been listening to every word. Russell, Marcus said, would you please walk Miss Whitfield to her car? And so the same man who had been ordered an hour earlier to remove a mechanic from the floor now walked the chief executive of Sterling Whitfield across her own showroom, past the silent salespeople, past the frozen clients, past the dead car that was already quietly being brought back to life. The irony was lost on no one. The doors closed behind her with a soft, final sound like the last page of a book turning. Now here is what I need you to understand, because this is the part the cameras never quite capture. Diane Sterling Whitfield did not lose everything that day because Marcus Bell was rich. She lost it because she had shown an entire room exactly who she was at the precise moment she believed her power made her untouchable. The wealth only made the fall public. The cruelty made it inevitable. A client near the door, a retired surgeon named Eleanor Hughes, had recorded the second confrontation on her phone, the moment Diane leaned down and hissed at a seated man to get out before she had him dragged away. Eleanor had not planned to use it, but that evening, unable to stop thinking about it, she posted the clip with a single line. A chief executive humiliated a man she thought was a mechanic. He turned out to own her company. Watch to the end. By midnight, the video had 40,000 views. By sunrise, it was everywhere, the clip of a woman in a charcoal dress telling a man in a work jacket that he smelled like a garage played and replayed until it became a kind of shorthand for every quiet humiliation people carried and had never been able to prove. And the people who watched it were not only angry, they were recognized. Because almost everyone has at least once offered to help and watched someone look at them as though they did not belong. That is why it spread. Not because it was rare, because it was familiar. The internal review took 9 days. What it found was worse than the video. 2 senior managers, both black, had left within a single year of Diane taking over. Both had filed complaints describing the same pattern. Proposals reassigned to other people, exclusion from the meetings that mattered, performance reviews that turned hostile the moment they asked for a promotion. One of them, a service director named Gerald Foster, had documented 14 separate incidents over 8 months. Both complaints had been routed to the same human resources manager, marked reviewed and resolved, and filed away without a single witness ever being contacted. Under questioning, that manager admitted Diane had personally instructed him to make the complaints disappear. When the findings leaked, a reporter ran the story under a headline that traveled almost as far as the videos. Behind the famous name, years of quiet discrimination at Sterling Whitfield. The article quoted Gerald Foster, who said, "I watched that video and I felt every single thing that man felt. The only difference is that nobody had a phone pointed at me." Diane Sterling Whitfield was formally terminated on a Tuesday morning. The board's letter cited gross misconduct and the deliberate suppression of discrimination complaints. She lost her salary and her equity. She even lost the generous severance her grandfather's lawyers had written into her contract years before, because that contract, the one she had never bothered to read closely, voided all of it in the event of proven discrimination, and she never once in any statement or hearing admitted she had done anything wrong. To the very end, she insisted she had only been protecting the standards of the company. She had simply, she said, been doing her job. That refusal, more than anything Marcus ever did, was what finished her. Bradford Lane's morning cost him too. The clip showed him clearly, laughing, saying out loud that this was what happened when you stopped watching the back door. Within a week, a development partner he had courted for a year quietly walked away from a deal, unwilling to attach their name to his. The man who had joked about people not belonging found a great many doors that no longer opened for him. Marcus Bell did not celebrate. He gave no triumphant speech. He posted nothing. On the day the termination was announced, he was in his office reviewing a maintenance schedule for the company's service fleet, and when his assistant brought him coffee, he said thank you and went back to work. But that evening he did one thing that was not on his calendar. He drove east 2 hours to a narrow brick row house in Cleveland with a furnace that used to quit in the cold, and he parked across the street and sat in his car for a while, looking at the small shop 2 blocks from the lake, where his father had taught him that the truth of a broken thing reveals itself only to the person patient enough to look. Then he drove home. A year later, the Sterling Whitfield Group looked nothing like the company Diane had run. Marcus had not torn it down. He had done something far harder. He had rebuilt it from the inside, one policy and one hire and one honest conversation at a time. The new chief executive was a woman named Adrienne Coleman, 44, who had spent 15 years in the industry and had been passed over for a leadership role at 2 other companies for reasons that were never quite written down. She had been Marcus's third choice. His first 2 candidates had turned the job down, worried about the company's reputation after the scandal. Adrienne took it anyway. When a reporter asked her why, she said, "Because someone has to be the first person to walk back into a room that was built to keep people out." Under Adrienne, the company opened an anonymous complaint line that went straight past management. It published an internal audit of a decade of promotions, an audit that confirmed what the staff had always known and never been able to prove, that candidates of color had been passed over at nearly 3 times the rate of everyone else. Every employee saw the numbers. No one could look away from them. And Gerald Foster, the service director who had documented 14 incidents and been driven out, was offered his old position back with a raise and a written apology. He took the apology. He took the raise. He came back. The anniversary showcase returned the following spring. Same boulevard, same glass, same warm light over the cars. But the room felt wider somehow, as though the walls had quietly moved to make space for people who had always been kept near the edges. Adrienne Coleman stood near the entrance and greeted every single person who walked through the door, the clients and the salespeople and the technicians in their work shirts. And she shook every hand that was offered to her, everyone. There was a new technician on the service team that night. A young man named Deshaun Carter, 23, his first month on the job, his tie knotted 1 attempt too many. He had heard the story of what happened the year before. Everyone had. He hesitated near the edge of the floor, the way every young person hesitates at their first important event. Then he straightened his shoulders, crossed to where Adrian stood, and put out his hand. "Miss Coleman," he said. "Deshaun Carter, service team. It is an honor." Adrian took his hand in both of hers. "Deshaun," she said, "I am glad you are here." 4 words. They cost nothing. They took less than 2 seconds. And they meant everything. There was one more thing that spring that Marcus had not planned for. Adrian Coleman, in the months of rebuilding the company, had sat across a table from him more times than either of them counted, going over policy, over hiring, over the slow work of turning a place around. Somewhere in all those careful conversations, something quieter had started to grow, the kind of thing that surprises people who long ago stopped expecting it. He had not gone looking for it. Neither had she. But the night of the showcase, after the last client left, she found him outside near his car. And she told him the company was finally becoming something worth being proud of. And she asked, almost shyly, whether he might want to get a cup of coffee sometime that had nothing to do with policy. And Marcus Bell, who had carried a private loss for years and rarely let anyone close enough to see it, found himself saying yes before he had time to talk himself out of it. Marcus had not been at the showcase that night, but Adrian had texted him a photograph from it, a young technician shaking her hand by the door. He was in his office when it came through, reading the final draft of a new company conduct policy. Page 9 contained a section titled Dignity in the Workplace. It was 3 paragraphs long. It was specific and it was enforceable, and it existed because of one dead car, one outstretched hand reaching for a relay, and one woman who had decided a man in work boots was beneath her notice. He read the section twice. He approved it. Then he opened the bottom drawer of his desk and took out a folded piece of paper, soft at the creases from being opened and refolded many times. It was a child's drawing in colored crayon, a lopsided house and a tall stick figure holding the hand of a much smaller one with a yellow sun crammed into the corner. He looked at it for a moment. He did not say anything. He folded it again along its worn lines and slid it back into the drawer. Then he checked the time, turned off his desk lamp, and stood. He had somewhere to be, and he did not want to be late getting home. He set the thin elastic hair tie back around his wrist, the small one he had carried all year, and he left the office. Some hands are offered in greeting, some are offered as a test, and some are offered simply to fix what is broken. And the measure of a person is not whether they take that hand, but whether they can see it at all. So let me ask you, if you had been standing in that showroom, in those work boots, with grease on your hands, and the whole room deciding who you were before you ever spoke, what would you have done? So let me ask you, if you had been standing in that showroom, in those work boots, with grease on your hands and the whole room deciding who you were before you ever spoke, what would you have done? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every one of them. And if this story moved something in you, share it with a person who needs to hear it today, and subscribe so the next one finds you. Disclaimer: this is a work of fiction. The names, characters, businesses, places, and events are products of imagination and creative dramatization. Any resemblance to real people, living or dead, or to actual companies or events, is entirely coincidental. A personal note: I keep coming back to the smallest detail in this whole story. Not the company, not the money, not the fall. A relay the size of a sugar cube. The cheapest part in a $200,000 machine was the thing that brought it down. And nobody important would even look at it. People do that to each other too. We decide who is worth our attention by what they are wearing. And we miss the person who could have fixed everything if we had only let them. Diane did not lose her company because Marcus was powerful. She lost it because she could not see a person until she was told he counted. Dignity that you only offer upward is not dignity. It is just performance. The way you treat someone who can do nothing for you is the only honest thing you will ever say about yourself.